I would love to tell you what we're talking about today, but it's a secret.
Wait, hold on.
I'm Ezra.
I'm Grayson, and welcome back to Are We Doing This Right on WEGL 91.1 Auburn. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be dealing with today on our secrets episode is going to be secret societies.
Exciting.
Yeah, exciting. So the first one, and the one that most people are very familiar with, rather, is the Freemasons, or just the Masons as they're commonly called. So these trace their roots back to basically proto-unions of stonemasons in as far back as the 1300s. And it's grown out of that into sort of this, effectively what is a social fraternity with a set series of values and a philanthropy arm now.
What did the stonemasons used to do? Like, do you know why they were founded?
So stonemasons are effectively like bricklayers and things like that. It was a trade union of tradesmen who would effectively build buildings and stuff like that. But it was advocating for them, making sure that training was going correctly. They were kind of like effectively a bar association for stonemasons. So like they would certify tradesmen and say, yes, you do know what you're doing. You carry this certification. You're good. That kind of thing. But it was done by a trade association rather than like a government association.
Okay.
But this grew into like a grouping, so it became a social fraternity, like I said. The basic organization in the modern iteration of it is the local lodge. So a local group of people within this society are grouped into local lodges. Those report to higher levels of organization at the regional and national and international level. This isn't just an American thing. It's across Europe and Asia. So if you want to become a member, effectively, usually you know someone in the lodge, but even if you don't, you can just like call up your local lodge and ask to, be, be invited to come like be a member. Now they don't reach out to people usually, it's the onus is on the person who wants to join to say, I would like to be in this. But in that initial process, after that, it becomes kind of like join a Greek organization. You meet pretty much every member of your local lodge, and after that, the lodge decides whether or not to accept you as a new member. And there is obviously a hierarchy within that will, decide whether or not you get to continue being a part of the lodge and deciding, the different levels within it. So there's a ranking system and a officership within lodges.
Interesting.
Yeah. And again, this is mostly a social thing that does have a few core values. Generally, you have to believe in some sort of supreme being. The main exception is parts of Europe, especially France, where you can be an atheist, and that's really going back to the French Revolution. This is a very old organization. But it doesn't really specify which being most of the time. It's just they believe religion is important no matter what that religion happens to be. And then as per their website, the three main focuses are honor, integrity, and philanthropic values. Most people are probably most familiar with the Masons and the philanthropy part through a subset of the Masons called the Shriners.
I didn't know the Shriners were part of the Freemasons.
Yeah, so they were formed much later in the late 1800s. They're an arm of the Masons that handles philanthropy and things like that. Mostly it's in things like the Shriners Hospitals, which is a network of, I think, 22 health providers within the United States that offer essentially services for children with like chronic illnesses. Whether or not they can pay, it's covered by them. They also are known for having parade units where they drive around in small cars and things like that. So the Red Fez people, those are actually an arm of the Freemasons.
That's wild.
Now, the Freemasons are obviously known because of, they're one of the oldest. They were heavily wrapped up in the founding of the United States and members of the Masons more so. And they've gained kind of this reputation for people who don't know much about them as this like insidious organization that's taking over the world. And they're really kind of not.
I mean, I guess I can see where that's coming from because they've been around for so long and they were so involved with so many crucial things. Right. That it might look like I get where the theories are coming from.
Right. And we'll talk more in depth about the theories specifically later. But what honestly feels a lot more insidious most of the time are the ones that happen at colleges. Now, they tend to be a lot more secret and harder to join than the Masons. They're a lot more exclusive.
Yeah.
The one that most people know here and the one that's kind of closest to home for us that we would really recognize is the Machine at Alabama. I'm not going to go into depth here because we value telling accurate stories, and I genuinely don't think I have enough information to fully tell this story.
Yeah, there's not a ton really there that's just objectively true, you know?
Right. It's very much, there's a lot of conjecture about it. But what
Very
we do
mysterious.
know is that it was originally founded as a fraternity and then slowly became a grouping of fraternities and sororities that form effectively a political machine on campus in the modern era. And the things attributed to them vary. You know, a lot of this stuff isn't verified. Everything from a possible arson at one point to meddling in local elections in Tuscaloosa. But as I said, none of that is confirmed fact, and I'm not going to state it as confirmed fact. Big
Yeah.
disclaimer. But what we know a lot more about are organizations at older universities. Specifically, Yale is one of the most famous ones. So the first one is called Brothers in Unity. Now, Yale has a system of effectively school-endorsed secret societies within the school. Yale is an immensely old organization. You know, it started in, I think, 1700, if not a little bit after that. And the actual fraternity system as we know it currently didn't exist until between 1750 and 1775, depending on who you ask.
I didn't even know that had been around that long.
Yeah, well, that was a much smaller thing. It started at William and Mary College, again, depending on who you ask. And we had fraternities and stuff before that, but not what we would think of in the modern sense of the word that operate like modern ones do. What they had back then were called literary and debate societies. And what these did for their members were mainly they would debate issues of the day, they would give them access to resources and stuff that other people on campus didn't have. It was both a social group, but also a group focused on academic achievement, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
So Brothers in Unity, the one we're going to be dealing with, started as one of those literary societies. They maintained libraries, things like that, when, you know, even the school didn't have its own at that point for its members. In 1841, though, they transitioned into a full-on secret society after being one of those literary societies for quite a while. And they're known for being highly selective and highly secretive. We don't even really know what they do on campus.
Huh.
They select at most, I think, 15 people per class per year, and it's only seniors in this one. Or actually, I think we don't actually know how much they select currently. They still operate, but they haven't actually published a list of their members since 1841. So nobody's really clear on their practices and who's an alumni and who's not. The other thing about this system is that generally there's a society, or there's two societies for each class, so freshman, junior, sophomore, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they are interconnected. So when you graduate from one class, it's generally you have one society that you might be tapped into the next year you're at the college. They are deeply interconnected, but nobody really knows who they're connected to or where it's coming from. And like I said, they still exist, but we're not really sure what they do. It's more of a, from what we can tell from the outside, more of like a networking thing than anything else. That also goes for the much more infamous one called Skull and Bones. Great name. Skull and Bones is actually one of the most prestigious and selective of these societies. Again, it's fully secret. It's pretty much always been that way. And it follows Yale's system. They are a little bit more open, so we know quite a few of who their alumni are, and they actually have an open, not quite board of trustees, but alumni like advisory board that watch over them. The alumni advisory board owns both their meeting place, which on Yale's campus for secret societies is called a tomb, and a 40-acre island called Deer Island on the Canada-New York state border.
That is spooky.
Yeah. And again, we don't really know what they do. They've actually, the biggest thing that we see is when they have like a dispute between the local society level and the the alumni advisory board. So in the early 90s, when they started trying to allow women into the society, Yale was originally all male, and so a lot of their oldest organizations still act like that. When they tried to allow women and the alumni board didn't want to do it, they effectively tried to do it anyway, and the alumni board came and changed the locks on the meeting place and effectively tried to oust everyone that was in control of the society. And later, they allowed women after they realized, oh, this is not going to go well if we just kick everyone out.
Fighting a losing battle there.
Right. And again, we don't really hear much out of that beyond, or out of them beyond that. We know that they are most attracted to new members from people who are on campus are, in places of power or star athletes or things like that. People who are likely to, go places after graduation, especially politically. We see among their alumni are people like multiple previous presidents, lots of people in, George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, all those. Multiple people outside of the presidency, but still in politics. John Kerry, I can't remember if he was a senator or not. He did run for president under the Democratic ticket, I think against W. Not sure. And people like that. And again, we still don't really know for sure what their actual activities on campus are outside of providing that kind of networking environment and a social fraternity aspect. But they don't tell anyone. They're a very secretive society. Now, this focus on them with both the secrecy and how many people they have in control in politics links them into all the conspiracies we mentioned earlier.
Of course.
They're one of the most commonly cited ones, along with people like the Freemasons and everyone else, as, this is who is founding the New World Order. And the other big one among that is the Illuminati.
Of course.
Generally, the Illuminati is cited as not really existing at all, but they did. The Illuminati were founded during the Enlightenment in Bavaria, which is modern-day Germany, in 1776. So they were a real society. They held lots of Enlightenment values, skepticism, a rejection of the influence of religion in state politics, things like that, things you'd expect. But they were actually disbanded by a law in the 1780s and 90s by people who were skeptical of them. Think of it like, if you're a monarch in the middle of the Enlightenment, you have reason to be scared of these kinds of organizations pushing these kinds of values that are very much anti-you.
Yeah.
Effectively. And so the real conspiracy tie-in is here because their big detractors after that, people on opposite sides of the Enlightenment, philosophically, were saying that they didn't disband. They just went underground, to the point of attributing things like the start of the French Revolution to the Illuminati. And these early critics create the modern mythology of this organization that, to be honest, probably doesn't exist. And that gets looped into an archetype of conspiracy theories and really creates the archetype of conspiracy theories of the New World Order, of there is someone plotting to control all these governments and take everything over, that is controlled by this secretive society that holds lots of people in power. And in a weird way, that gets attributed to every secret society, even though it never really, hooked on to one single one.
It seems like in lieu of knowing what these secret societies do, people just kind of default to they're plotting to take over the world.
Exactly. And I think that that's usually inaccurate, especially looking at the Freemasons and what they do. I think that's something that, we see all these societies that are effectively social fraternities with philanthropic arms, but they get lumped in with this conspiracy. And I think that we really need to take a step back and be like, okay, where does this all come from? Does this have any founding in reality before we pass that kind of judgment? When we come back, the trade secrets behind restaurants and recipes.
Keep me up with your emotions.
Welcome back to Are We Doing This Right? Okay, so secret recipes, right?
Yeah. So secret recipes, they're kind of like renowned, often like a family thing, a tradition that's passed down from generation to generation. But we're most familiar with it in the context of brands, like big brands that we know. And so one of the most famous and most protected recipes is the secret recipe to Coca-Cola. And so there's I hadn't realized, but there's a lot of almost like mythology around protecting this formula because obviously one of the most successful sodas doesn't want to get like they don't want competition or they don't want people imitating their beverage. So it actually all started as a marketing ploy in the late 1800s when Coca-Cola was first getting started. The founder decided to kind of spin this mystery around the beverage. And of course, they'll list what ingredients are in it, but that doesn't tell you how to replicate it.
Was this still when it was pretty much all cocaine?
Actually, so that's a little bit of a myth. It was never all cocaine. However, it did have a little bit of cocaine. It was originally marketed as like a headache cure, and it was made with coca leaf,
Yes.
which of course is what cocaine comes from, and cola nuts, spelt with a K. And cola nuts is actually that's where the name came from. I mean, that seems obvious now, but Coca-Cola, the coca leaf and the cola nuts. But back then, they tried to market the ingredients as kind of like mysterious and secret, and no one knows what it is. And even today, supposedly only 2 people know the recipe to make Coca-Cola.
Who are those 2 people?
That's the mystery.
Oh.
We don't know who they are. It's kept secret, and if they're not allowed to travel together, and if one of them dies, then the other living one who knows the recipe has to appoint a successor.
Oh God, it's like The Giver, but it's for Coke.
I think it's a myth, honestly. I don't think there's any way that could be true.
I mean, I want it to be true for certain.
Yeah. Now, one thing that is for certain is the lengths that Coca-Cola still goes to keep their recipe secret. When they're manufacturing the drink, they manufacture it in 9 different steps at 9 different plants, in order to supposedly minimize the knowledge that each individual group has. So, like plant number 1, they will know everything about that process, but they won't know anything about the other 8 and what their role is in making the beverage. And even though we don't even know what all 9 of these plants produce, we know one of them produces fructose, which makes a lot of sense. The soda is mostly fructose, but we don't really know about the rest. There's a lot of just dispute over like where they even are. Like, oh, there's this old abandoned warehouse, I guess not abandoned, but there'll be like these mysterious warehouses, and people will just kind of assume like, oh, it's probably for Coca-Cola.
I like this new brand of conspiracy we have where it's just like, oh, an abandoned warehouse? That must be Coke.
Exactly. There's one recipe that I think I've heard a lot more, and it seems a lot more interesting than the secret behind Coca-Cola, and that's KFC's 11 herbs and spices. So this, just like Coca-Cola, it was kind of a marketing thing. It was originally considered a trade secret, and it's not patented or anything. So if someone else stumbles upon this recipe, they can use it. They don't infringe any law, but Colonel Sanders and KFC, they're allowed to keep that secret indefinitely. They don't have to ever reveal it to the public.
Right, and there are important caveats with the we don't patent it because it's a trade secret thing. If you, for example, are another company and you go in specifically like corporate espionage trying to find it,
Yeah.
then you can be sued over that. That is a problem.
Yeah, of course. So I didn't actually know the history behind KFC. For one, Colonel Sanders is an honorary colonel. He is not a literal colonel. He is a Kentucky colonel. It's a little sad.
Yeah.
But he actually got it all started working out of a gas station that he owned, and his fried chicken sold a whole lot better than the gas. So he shut down the gas station and started selling fried chicken full time with his special blend of 11 herbs and spices. And this original recipe, handwritten, is kept in a vault with vials of the 11 herbs and spices preserved for, I guess, in the event that they need to find it or something.
I'm sorry, back up. Colonel Sanders was a real person?
Yeah. Oh, no. Colonel Sanders is not just a marketing figure in the vein of like Ronald McDonald. Colonel Sanders is a real dude who really liked chicken. And the KFC recipe they use, even though it has been adapted, it's very similar to his original.
Oh, God, next you're going to tell me there's a Dr. Pepper. Like, come on.
It's a game changer. So there was a little bit of just like how Coca-Cola manufactures their mix in 9 steps, KFC manufactures their mix in 2. They have one that does the first half, one company that does the second half. And so while Colonel Sanders was alive, after KFC took off, he started franchising it. Other people took over businesses. He's not still alive, by the way.
Oh,
I know, unfortunate.
sad
But
day.
what actually ended up happening is these franchises were they weren't using the authentic 11 herbs and spices. They were taking shortcuts. And the colonel did not like this very much. And so he had a friend at the Marion K Spices Manufactory, and he started working with them to make his own blend of 11 herbs and spices that they just sold in stores. However, this was fine while he was alive. But after he died, KFC sued the company, even though they were using Colonel Sanders' original recipe. And so it was kind of an interesting legal case. Basically, they're allowed to continue selling it, but they are prohibited from selling it to KFC because certain KFC franchises were trying to buy the higher quality mix instead and use it to sell their food. But they were prohibited from doing that. However, they do still sell it, and it's under the brand name 99-X.
So you can just buy this publicly and put it on your own chicken?
You can.
Oh.
I didn't know that either. However, this still doesn't answer what are the 11 herbs and spices.
Please tell me you have an answer.
I do have an answer. So Colonel Sanders' nephew, in 2016, he found a handwritten note that the colonel had written it was from an old scrapbook, and it was just this torn piece of paper, and it had the 11 herbs and spices on it. And so they wanted to verify that it obviously held up. And so they imitated the rest of the chicken process. They fried buttermilk chicken, they put MSG on it, and then they concluded that it was the original recipe. They compared it, and the nephew had actually helped Colonel Sanders with making chicken a while ago. And so it was compared with his living relatives, it matches up. They remember some of the ingredients. So I am excited to read aloud the 11 herbs and spices.
Hold on, let me make sure that we are just fully on the air first before we do this.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Go ahead.
All right, so 2/3 tablespoon salt, 1/2 tablespoon thyme, 1/2 tablespoon of basil, 1/3 tablespoon of oregano, 1 tablespoon of celery salt, 1 tablespoon of black pepper, 1 tablespoon of dried mustard, 4 tablespoons of paprika, 2 tablespoons of garlic salt, 1 tablespoon of ground ginger, and 3 tablespoons of white pepper, the key ingredient. Make sure you write that down.
Okay, hold on. I need to go. I'll be right back.
So there is one recipe that is more sought after than Colonel Sanders' 11 herbs and spices, and that's the Krabby Patty secret formula. So
I don't know what I was expecting you to say, but it wasn't the Krabby Patty secret formula.
So, of course, this is fictional. This is from SpongeBob. It was Eugene H. Krabs' famous Krabby Patty secret formula, most renowned for his rival Plankton trying to steal it. If you haven't heard of this, then you're probably living under a rock, like Patrick. I didn't write that. Anyway, so I'm looking into this because I just had to know. It doesn't look like there is necessarily a 100% true secret formula. It's not 100% defined, but there is a lot of evidence suggesting what it could be. So a while ago, Nickelodeon published a secret recipe that suggested using imitation crab in the recipe. And of course, this raises some serious questions about the show. And the evidence for is in one episode, Mr. Krabs, he bites into a Krabby Patty and he's like, "Oh, so this is what I taste like." And then he has his signature laugh. But it's probably just a joke. And recently, Nickelodeon has clarified that Mr. Krabs would never make Krabby Patties out of crabs. So I'm going to go ahead and rule that one off as probably not true. But it does sound interesting, a burger that's partially crab.
Well, I don't think anyone ever tried to claim that Eugene Krabs was very ethical in his business practices, but I don't know. I could see it.
Yeah, me too. So if you look into this online, there's this frequent mention of the secret ingredient being what's called King Poseidon's powder. And I could not, there's almost this mythos around that. That's just the accepted ingredient. However, Poseidon's powder is sometimes used as a euphemism for cocaine. which is certainly not what the intended secret ingredient is.
It makes sense why people keep coming back.
Of course, but also you find if you look further into it that there's never really been an official point on the show when this was established. People just started saying it, and then everyone just ran with it. But one explanation that I've heard is that this is most likely just MSG, adding MSG to the patty. However, I think the far more likely explanation for the Krabby Patty secret formula, and there seems to be a lot of evidence suggesting this, is that there isn't one. It's all an elaborate ploy by Mr. Krabs to keep Plankton distracted. So that way he doesn't improve his business and the Krusty Krab stays on top.
Wow.
So hopefully this answers all of your food-related mysteries and secrets.
I think it does. All right. When we come back, the Easter egg, or things that hide in plain sight.
Certain death, haven't had a chance to yet. Maybe by the time we
Welcome back to Are We Doing This Right? So just in time for Easter, you're going to tell us about Easter eggs?
Yeah. So Easter eggs are a common feature in lots of media. We are most familiar with them in games and movies, and that's really what I'm going to be profiling here. But they can be in pretty much everything, as we'll talk about later. The actual origin of the term starts from an Atari game from the late 70s called Adventure. This game was groundbreaking for a number of reasons. It was really the first instance of what we would consider a graphical action-adventure game. It was based on a text-based adventure game, called Colossal Cave Adventure. It's known for not only that, but for the unprecedented level of complexity that occurred within it. And keep in mind, we're still on the Atari 2600 here. This is very like low-end graphics, very much, just squares and lines. But this is because it was such an influential game and sold so many copies, it actually ties into another issue that Adobe was having at the time. So, Atari.
I thought you were about to say that like Adobe owns Atari and just like blow my mind. But
Well, I wouldn't be surprised at this point, but no, not yet. So Atari was, they were one of the pioneering in the home console market, and really one of the only successful ones long-term at the time. And they had a large incentive to keep their programmers at Atari. And at this time, we are still at the very much the onset of console gaming. This is so early in the technology that most games would be programmed by really one person and no one else. So Atari had a policy of not ever releasing the programmer's name along with the game. You effectively wouldn't get credited and you wouldn't get royalties from your game because they didn't want competitors to be able to figure out who you were and try and get you to come to their company instead of Atari.
interesting.
This is actually how Activision was founded. So disgruntled programmers from Atari who didn't like this policy and didn't like how much money the company was making and not giving any to them, that they, broke off and formed Atari. The developer Warren Robinett was one of the ones that broke off later, but he was the sole developer on Adventure. Robinett, in a small part of the game, if you did a specific thing, I think you had to pick up a certain item and then go to a place, you would be able to find a small secret room that just had created by, Warren Robinett in it. So it was a way of just adding his own signature to the, I did this, dang it, screw everyone above me.
I remember they covered that in Ready Player One. That's like a big plot point, that first Easter egg.
Right, and that's the first time that we really see the term being used. Atari was massively angry with him once they got a report that this was used. He didn't tell anyone that they did this, and they didn't know about it until after he left. So they had to task programmers to go through his code line by line and find it. And the original plan was to remove it, but then they realized the cost estimates of doing this. Now, keep in mind, every game is still its own circuit board with its own memory chip, and every layout is unique to each game.
So if they were to issue a recall, they would have to effectively scrap all the old circuit boards. They couldn't just put the new game on it.
They would have to stop production and retool a huge part of the production line, which is hugely expensive now, but that would have cost at least $10,000 in 1979 money, which is just they deemed it financially, unusable, so they kept it in production. and made it a marketing point. So, this was a hugely complex adventure game. So it made sense to print a thing on the back of the box that said, look out for Easter eggs. There's a lot hidden in this game. And because that actually helped it sell so well, it became a feature of every Atari game thereafter. Usually it was just a room with only the programmer's initials, but because of that one disgruntled programmer, it became a thing in each one of their games and really trickled to the rest of the game industry quite quickly.
Yeah, you started seeing Easter eggs that weren't just initials.
Right. They become much more complex things, or, this is, I would say, really how we get the side quest,
Yeah.
things that aren't main game content, but, a dedicated fan can still find. The games, or most modern Easter eggs in games, are referencing other games, either in a series if it's in one, or just, around to other video games. For example, Call of Duty Black Ops 2 actually hid a playable Activision game inside one of their maps. So you could walk up to a TV and it would have like old Atari's 2600 games that if you walked up and activated it, your hands would put down the gun they were having, and then they would become pixelated and holding an Atari controller while you're playing this in-game.
That's interesting.
And keep in mind, this is a multiplayer map. This was Nuketown, I think, if you've ever played the game.
Yeah.
And you're still on a timed match. You're still getting shot at by other players, but you have the choice to do so if you want.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah. Valve, the company that made like Half-Life 2 and Portal, for people who don't know, is generally pretty subtle about Easter eggs. They like to include them, but they are either usually hidden behind a command or they only happen on specific days and times.
Designed to be like tasteful.
Right. The most famous one, and my favorite, is in the game Team Fortress 2, which is Valve's kind of multiplayer shooter. It's very well known, very cartoony and fun. It has this awesome thing called birthday mode. They originally released this as a patch right after or right before the birthday of the thing being released. This is August 23rd, and it still works. So on August 23rd, every player would initially just spawn wearing a birthday hat. Ammo drops would be retextured, so you'd see a box of ammo on the ground. It'd have a little bow on top. All the health packs that the medics use now look like cakes and slices of cake.
That's so sweet.
And now you have, it caused a bunch of problems. Now you can have the option of putting on the hat on Valve's birthday. It's also, you can actually have it enabled all year round on certain servers. It's up to the server owner to decide to do that, and you can search for them with the tag birthday if you so please. The other really funny thing it does is it replaces blood particles in the animations when you shoot someone with balloon particles. So when you shoot someone, it's like popping a balloon while you're in birthday mode. And a lot of things from that mode actually got carried over into the low violence mode.
Yeah, I
of
remember
TF2.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's also other things like in Half-Life, you can shoot certain things and it'll bring up pop culture references. You also see references in games like Minecraft. If you've ever played this, when you open up the first screen, there's usually a small bit of text kind of scrolling past on the Minecraft logo.
Oh, there's a lot of Easter eggs there.
Oh, yeah. The one I remember is like there were a lot of Portal references in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't played Minecraft in quite a while, so I don't know what they do currently. Outside of games, it's not really that common. It's generally more in individual studios and movie producers and things like that.
I know Pixar is very fond of their Easter eggs.
Pixar is actually really prolific about it. They include them in almost every movie, if not every movie. Usually they're referencing other past movies. For example, like when you watch Monsters, Inc., if you watch when he's trying to put Boo back in her room, there's a Jessie doll from Toy Story 2 laying on the ground. They also tend to reference future projects in these. So Cars, which came out in 2006, if you look during the initial sequence in the background of it, Wally actually drives across the racetrack, and Wally didn't come out until 2008. There's even references to him in the, I think in the either in Toy Story or The Incredibles, whichever came out first. This was a concept that had been on the books for a while.
Interesting.
But they tend to hint at their later projects, which is such a small, weird detail that I could only see Pixar doing.
It's something that, like, if you hadn't, it's entirely unnoticeable until the movie has already come out, you know?
Right, and I think that's what a good Easter egg is. It's something that's so small and a detail that could so easily be overlooked by anyone who isn't like paying attention to it, that it enhances the experience for someone who's like paid attention to that studio. This is also not limited to their company. They've used, like we talked about last week, the Utah Teapot. That's actually used a lot in their movies. So if you can imagine, Pixar is staffed mainly by 3D animation nerds.
Of course.
And so when Woody holds up a teapot in Toy Story 2, no, I think it's Toy Story 1, it's actually the shape of the Utah Teapot.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's, again, just small little references like that. Speaking of Pixar, their parent company, Disney, another hugely detail-oriented place, especially in their theme parks. I was lucky enough to be able to go to Disney theme parks quite a few times as a kid. And so they have this thing in the park called the Hidden Mickey. Are you familiar with this?
I am. You can explain it.
So effectively, they like to hide the outline of Mickey Mouse's head throughout Disney parks and properties. I'm most familiar with this I first learned of it from pin trading that happens within the park. So sometimes when you're in the park, you'll see people wearing lanyards with a bunch of enamel pins on them. And you'll also see cast members, people that work there wearing them. And people can go up and like trade pins. And they have these sets of pins called the Hidden Mickey pins, where there will be a small Mickey Mouse head emblem on the upper or hidden somewhere in the image of the pin. And they come in series that you can actually collect.
If I'm remembering correctly, can't you only get the Hidden Mickey ones from trading with the park members? They don't sell them?
Well, you can't buy the specific ones in the park.
Of course.
I mean, you can buy them afterwards. What they do sell sometimes is mystery packs. So it's kind of like a trading card game, right? So normally when you buy these pins, they're just out on the racks, but you can buy these Hidden Mickey in like foil pouches, or at least you used to be able to. I'm not sure. I haven't done it in a while.
Yeah.
But you would never know exactly which one you're getting, which is obviously the ideal. Now, obviously, this is not just pin trading. This goes from, the tiniest details in the decoration to something as big as and I'm going to back off the mic a little bit for this, a high voltage electricity pylon. So
what?
Disney, as we've may or may not have mentioned before, operates basically as its own city, and they can just kind of get weird with building codes. And so the main transmission line, 230 kilovolt transmission line feeding into their system, is actually in the shape of a Mickey head.
Of course it is.
So this thing is like 60 feet tall, and it's carrying all the electricity for the park. And it's shaped like a Mickey Mouse head.
What a great use of resources.
Why are we allowed to do this? No one tells them no.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, but it's not all electric pylons. It's also smaller things. Like they're usually hidden within the decoration and the theming of each individual area. And I think that's what's really so cool about that. It's such a small detail that they didn't have to do, that it's indicative of just how much they care about the, visitor experience at the park. Something so like those tiny, tiny details that just really just only contribute to people who pay really close attention and care is, I think, just a big mark of their quality, and I really appreciate what they do for it.
Really, that's what Easter eggs are all about. Just a tiny little nod somewhere that helps make someone's day.
All right, when we come back, whistleblowers.
Your best friends won't be your friends anymore. They won't pretend anymore to let you.
Welcome back to Are We Doing This Right, where we only discuss information that's already in the public domain.
All right. So you kind of took my disclaimer for me. So we're going to have a little bit of serious time because whistleblowing is a serious topic with serious repercussions. And so I want to go ahead and make it clear that I'm going to mention some things that are like just facts, but that are controversial. Whistleblowing tends to be very divisive. Some people see it as like informing the public is always important. We need full government transparency. And of course, you can't have necessarily full government transparency because certain things need to stay secret to keep a country safe.
Right. Our goal in discussing this is to present the information without providing a value judgment upon it. We just want to make that clear at the outset.
Yeah. So first, a brief definition. Whistleblowing is defined as anyone who informs the public on a person or an organization engaged in an illicit activity, You usually see this in terms of like when people go into corporations and maybe they mention the poor policies that are in place, or they record video and they show what's actually happening. But it's also very, very common in government. And especially in the case of government, whistleblowing one's own country can be very difficult because you risk being prosecuted, or in some cases, like you need to evacuate at that point. But some famous whistleblowers who fortunately are still in the country. Um, Daniel Ellsberg, who I hadn't heard of, he actually released the documents on why the United States ended up in the Vietnam War. What was kind of going on, the pressures internal that were pushing and caused that conflict to kind of start. He released those to the public, and it very much impacted even like what they teach in the history books, because the information the government was providing at those times was not accurate. Oh, and it did not provide the full picture. Um, Mark Felt also was another famous whistleblower, and he actually released a lot of the information with the Watergate scandal. That probably wouldn't have come to fruition if it weren't for him. And his name wasn't even publicly revealed until 2006 because it was such a dangerous topic to come clean about. He risked his life in doing so. But I'm going to talk about the most recent or at least the most recent famous whistleblower, and that is Edward Snowden. So, as we know, in 2013, a lot of information was released about specifically how the NSA and the CIA operate in our country. And I want to first talk a little bit about why this information even showed up. So Edward Snowden was this, by all regards, really kind of brilliant tech dude. Even after he left, all his peers kind of referred to him as like a genius. He was a little full of himself, but very, very confident in his abilities, and he had worked his way up to a very powerful position within the NSA and the CIA. And so, but like when he was employed, he realized that the surveillance that the CIA was doing was unethical, and he tried to like bring this up to his supervisors, and they kind of just ignored him because it's the way that the NSA and the CIA had been operating for some time. He was not at the top of the totem pole. His opinion wasn't really seen as valuable in this instance. But at that point, he started saving documents about what kind of spying programs our government was doing. And of course, he kept all this to himself. And back in 2008, which I didn't realize that this had been going on for so long, but in 2008, he was ready to release these documents. But then President Obama got elected, and it kind of gave him hope that reform would happen in the CIA and the NSA. And unfortunately, it did not. In, I think, either 2012 or 2013, James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, lied under oath to Congress. And at the time, the only people who would know that he was lying under oath were the people in the CIA and in the NSA. Edward Snowden being one of these people. And so he saw that their director was going in front of Congress and telling lies about what their organization was and was not doing. And that kind of made his blood boil, and that's when he decided he was going to get all the information he could, he was going to work his way up, and then he was going to release that information. So he moved to Hawaii and continued to get and obtain data. And by the end, he had disclosed a total of 1.7 million documents that he had saved. Let's see here. So when releasing his information, his words exactly were, "I understand that I will be made to suffer for my actions and that the return of this information to the public marks my end." And in this way, Edward Snowden knew that there was a very real risk that he was going to be seen as a traitor by his country. He then flew to Hong Kong after releasing the information. He corresponded with people at The Guardian, The Washington Post, and a few other news organizations, and he let them have disclosure over what information would and would not be released so that they could decide what was... There was obviously some information in this documents that would get people killed if it was released. And so that information, for the most part, was held back. It wasn't things that the people needed to know. But I want to briefly go over the information that did get released in 2013. I'm sure we all heard this at the time, but some of this was new to me when I was reading about it, and I think it's something we could all use a refresher on. So just a series of bullet points here. So the NSA was revealed to have had developed a program to directly access any American's Yahoo and Google account. I believe any Yahoo and Google account in general. Verizon was revealed to provide millions of American phone records daily. The NSA was tracking the location of American cell phones. They found the NSA was spying on users on World of Warcraft and Xbox Live, which I thought was strange. The NSA, in an attempt to discredit radicalizers, were following these people who they deemed radicalizers. They were following their sexual history online and attempting to use it to discredit them. The NSA had their mission objective within their internal wiki stated as collect it all, process it all, exploit it all, partner it all, sniff it all, and know it all. Roughly 90% of those under investigation by the CIA and the NSA were revealed to be Americans with no prior suspicion. The NSA was revealed to have spies on at least 38 foreign embassies. The NSA had discovered a loophole to search American citizens' emails and phone calls without a warrant or seeing a court prior. The NSA analysts were found to often spy on their personal love interests, intercepting data about them and using it, obviously, to pursue their, quote, love interests. They found the United States had carried out 231 cyber attacks. These were not on the defensive. The NSA had referred to drone attacks as, quote, propaganda campaigns by American adversaries. The opposition to drone attacks, I should specify. The NSA had tapped the mobile phone of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, who I believe is still the Chancellor of Germany.
Yeah, she is.
The NSA was revealed to have infected over 50,000 computers with malware designed explicitly to harvest sensitive information. The NSA was found to use browsing data from Google to target hacking targets that they thought would be most exploitable. The NSA was monitoring users who visited the WikiLeaks website and then tracking them when they went elsewhere. And the NSA was taking pictures off of social networking and storing it in their facial recognition database. So that's a lot. And you can understand why a lot of people were kind of shocked and outraged. I know everyone today just jokes about their Alexa and their Google Home spying on them. We're all kind of used to it. But in 2013, everyone thought people who said the government was spying on you, they thought that they were conspiracy nuts. And Edward Snowden provided credibility and showed that they weren't.
That's what's so wild about this whole thing is that you hear all that whole list of things and it's just like, there's no way all of that is true. But because of this one person saying, this is unethical, well, we know for a fact now. That's what's so terrifying about it. That's what it took.
Absolutely. And after all this got released, the Guardian and the Washington Post, they got Pulitzer Prizes, and they were very claimed. Like this was a game changer. And Edward Snowden got his passport revoked 18 days later. He was in Hong Kong at the time because he feared backlash after this, rightfully so.
Does Hong Kong have an extradition treaty with the U.S.?
I don't believe so. I know that right after his passport got revoked, he went to Moscow, and that's where he's currently resided.
And Russia definitely doesn't have an extradition treaty with the U.S.
They do
just
not.
To be clear.
And there is another so Edward Snowden was called a traitor and a hero. A lot of people saw this as something that the American citizens had the right to know. A lot of people, especially those in the NSA and the CIA, thought that this was terrible. This really hurt American foreign relations, especially like Germany. A lot of world leaders, we had been found to be listening to their phone calls, and that made a lot of countries very upset with us. And so,
rightfully so.
Yeah. But a lot of people called him a traitor. And it unfortunately really worsened America's situation in Afghanistan at the time. Snowden fled the country obviously he was looking out for his own well-being, but a lot of people say he fled the country, whereas he could have stayed in the country and gone to trial and kind of tried to fight this legally, and instead he just ran away. And I think there is some criticism to be said there. I'm sure we all understand why he did that, but I don't want to discredit those who call Edward Snowden a traitor. There is definitely an argument to be made there. But the awareness led by this, this is something that we all kind of accept. The government listens to us. And specifically companies like Apple, they started taking steps to protect their users from government backdoors, something that they previously were not concerned with. There started being this whole market for apps that legitimately do protect your privacy, and we haven't had any leaks since 2013, so we don't know if those are still effective. But because the public has a general awareness of privacy more so than they did, well, things have definitely changed a little bit since then.
Right. It's absolutely changed just the public perception of computer security and why it's important. Now that it's not just I'm looking out for myself from illegal hackers, now that I'm just trying to keep myself from being spied on.
Exactly. And I think really, like that's ultimately what it is people knew the government was spying, but I don't think people knew that 90% of the people the government was spying on was just everyday Americans. So since then, Edward Snowden, and he actually has been partnered with some people at MIT. In 2016, they developed a device that determines if your phone is sending information when it's turned off or when it's in airplane mode. And they managed to unfortunately prove that, yes, when your phone is turned off, its microphone can still be accessed and data can be streamed from it. Google likes to use this for advertising. The government likes to use this to record information.
Is the Google advertising thing verified?
I believe so. There was less information about that. There are different things. WikiLeaks published information on Google using it for advertising. I have not looked as far into the reputability of that. But we do know for a fact that if your phone is turned off, its microphone can be accessed. Just something to keep in mind. But regardless of where you stand on Snowden in particular, I think it's important to recognize the whistleblowers throughout history, the people in like the Industrial Revolution who were acknowledging how terrible working conditions were, the people who got justice in the Watergate situation, things like that. I think it's important to acknowledge that those who really put themselves on the line to inform the public, you got to recognize them.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, I think both Ezra and I would like to say thank you to anyone who's been listening to our show for as long as we've been doing it.
We really appreciate it.
It's been a really exciting year, and I think we've both gotten a lot better at this, and we're really, really excited to show you what is coming.
Tune in next semester.
All right. Thank you for listening. That's our show for this week. Listen to Are We Doing This Right every Friday at 2 on WEGL 91.1 in Auburn or on WEGLFM.com. Follow us on Twitter at AWDTR Pod, that's AWDTR as in Are We Doing This Right, for notifications of when we go live and when we post recordings of the show. I'm Grayson.
I'm Ezra.
And thank you for listening.
You can recognize a change.